Hi, everyone. Good evening. How are we all doing? Good. A little louder. Okay. All right. I'll go with that. Good evening. My name is Sophia McGee. I am the Associate Director of CERRU's America and the Middle East program, and I am also the Center's Program Manager. I think I'm going to start with this short video. We were given a grant by the Provost's office at the beginning of this year, and with that grant we were able to both workshop one of our simulations and also document it, which has been kind of an amazing thing. So I think the Provost has left, so I will thank him. I guess I'll thank him later. But here, somewhere, I also have no sense of direction, and everyone knows this, so they're holding back chuckles, but there it is. Look at the video.
To get greater empathy, you had to learn the pains and claims specifically of the other side. And we had this walk in the other side shoes. So this curriculum that got this name, America and the Middle East, Clash of Civilizations, which people were thinking was happening and inexorable, versus a meeting of minds, which people thought was not likely, if not impossible. And my bias was towards the other.
The lessons learned for the students begin even before they get their role and they start to immerse themselves playing somebody whose sides, pains, and claims they don't know.
To the Palestinians, the Israelis, the Egyptians, and the Americans here today, thank you for giving me the opportunity to work with you.
He said there's 3 different kinds of people involved in this. There are current students, there are alumni who have been through the course, and then there's faculty members.
Like this, what do we want to say in our committee meetings? Like what sorts of positions should we have? What are our red lines? So that's kind of my role. It's much more of a kind of like orchestrator.
Why this kind of immersion really works. First, they study with real negotiators from Israel, from the Palestinian Authority, from the United States and other Arab states. They spend 6-7 weeks interacting with people who've had the experience as real-life negotiators.
I don't think anyone of us here thinks that we're going to solve all the problems today. But there are things that we can do and we can offer you that will greatly benefit the Palestinian people and ease suffering. And that's a fact.
No, East Jerusalem is the most important settlement.
It is.
So what's happened here in the simulation, students make a very dramatic understanding that there is a, not black and white here, there's a mixture of grays when you have walked in the other side's shoes in a carefully constructed long-term simulation.
Temporary funds will be allocated. We'll find the funds to make the textbooks happen. An external entity will verify, and then the tax funds will be released.
Students who participate in simulations like this report that the material sticks with them for a lifetime. And I mean, again, you could probably measure the amount of dilation of the pupils that's going on in the students in this group, right? Or their heartbeats, their pulse, their how much they're sweating. And if that's happening, I think better understanding of the material is happening.
The kinds of comments we get at the end of this experience when they've finished a full-blown simulation. Jewish Orthodox student, for example, says, wow, I never really understood what the Palestinian narrative was in the most compelling way. I didn't decamp. I didn't have a new chip put in my mind where I began to think like a Palestinian at the end of this simulation. But I did start to understand my side committed wrongs in this conflict.
My name is General Abdullah Yahya.
I am the head of the Palestinian delegation.
My name is Paul Basham. I've been a naval officer all my life.
Hi, my name is Ghazan Khatib, and I am working to resolve the refugee issue with Israel.
Deeper analysis without political paralysis.
I think one of the most important things about simulations is it allows you to really understand the psychological dynamics of negotiation.
It's not about taking on the narrative of the other side, it's about understanding that there is a narrative to the other side.
They really learn what real negotiators learn. They learn about the difficulties and the layers of complexity of a conflict. And this is one of the brilliant things about the simulation that we construct. The impact it has on students of getting them to know better their own side and their own side's warts and all through the simulation of playing the other.
I met Professor Mark Rosenblum doing a simulation very similar to the one that you just saw. And so I can attest firsthand that this was a completely transformative experience. For me, as a young woman who, I didn't even grow up in an Orthodox Jewish household, I grew up in a Reformed Jewish household, but with a very traditional kind of American labor Zionist narrative. As Bill Clinton, Batia Septimus, says in the film, it wasn't that I didn't believe in the other side, it's that I really did not realize that there was another side. So to be able to take that course, to have Palestinians actually come and speak to us, I mean, I'll echo what Batia said. The first time a Palestinian person came to speak to us, I was petrified. I mean, literally petrified, like shaking. And I went back to grad school later, so it's not that I was that young. I just hadn't been, exposed to this. But just to then be able to place someone on the Palestinian side, to realize that there really are legitimate pains and claims on that side, is kind of a wonderful experience. And also to see, an Arab or a Palestinian student playing an Israeli role and hearing your own narrative spoken to you by someone that it seems like it would come from is also kind of a transformative experience. So I guess I'd like to be able to say that I've kind of learned to live in the gray. I still believe what I believe, but I also understand that there's another side that has legitimate pains and claims, and that we need to all work together going forward, to both understand each other and to move forward to solve this conflict. So this year, the video was really the first kind of exciting thing that happened for us. We also took our show on the road. We took a mini version of this simulation to Hampshire College and did it with students there, and that's the first time we've done something like that, so that was exciting. We also are going to be linking this simulation program, hopefully more in the future, to study abroad programs. And in fact, there are two young women in our simulation right now who will be going to the Middle East to study this summer. They'll be going to several countries. I'm not sure if they're completely confirmed, but certainly among them are going to be Oman, the United Arab Emirates, Israel, and the Palestinian territories. So that's the kind of experiential part of it that we're trying to link this to. So to constantly live in the gray of something is an incredibly noble aspiration, regardless of what the issue is, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or whatever the kind of difficult, intractable issue. But of course, it's important for us to continue to strive to live in this gray area. That being said, all of us probably have one or two areas where it is almost completely impossible to live in the gray, something that's very close to our hearts, where it is difficult, if not impossible, to be able to hear the other side of the story. I'm certainly not immune to this, and I guess with this I will segue into announcing and honoring our second nominee, our second awardee for the evening. For me, one of these issues is gun control. And although, of course, I belong to an organization where we aren't supposed to advocate for anything, where we teach our students information before advocacy as staff members, we really try to stay as neutral as possible. I know that personally, this is one of the issues that I struggle with, there being another side too, besides the side that I believe. I think that this was only hardened for me by the events of the past year, and specifically the shooting at the Sandy Hook Elementary School. My husband and I are from New Haven, Connecticut, so about half away from where the shooting happened. And we have friends in the school district. Many of the classrooms that were targeted had first grade students in them. We have a son who's in first grade. So this was kind of an enormously overwhelming event for me personally, and of course helped to harden my position because this is what happens. So it's kind of amazing that there are people like Stephen Barton in this world. Stephen Barton, as you can see from his bio, graduated from Syracuse in 2012, so not so long ago, and was blissfully off on a road trip with a friend, a bicycle trip, and happened to be in the theater in Aurora, Colorado, where the mass shooting happened last summer and was shot multiple times. So this has changed his life, I would imagine, in an incredible way. He was off to do a Fulbright in Russia and instead has spent at least this year working on the issue of gun control, mostly through the organization Mayors Against Illegal Guns, Mayor Bloomberg, which was started by Mayor Bloomberg. But it's kind of amazing to speak to Stephen. I got Stephen on the phone and I went through my entire anti-gun rant. And Stephen said, well, you know, the reason that nothing can get done is because everyone is only seeing the black and white of this issue. Everyone is so kind of ensconced in their particular advocacy of this issue that nobody will listen to each other. And so you have this kind of paralysis where it's impossible to get anything done. And we really have to learn how to talk to each other and understand that there is kind of another side to this issue, even if we don't agree with it. At Mayors for Illegal Guns, for instance, we talk about Second Amendment rights, and we talk about keeping guns out of the hands of people who shouldn't have them. We talk about what is right for a big city like New York, and we talk about what is right for a small rural city that has a different culture and kind of a different way of being. And so I came out of that conversation transformed, and also thinking that certainly if there was anyone who was kind of uncommonly courageous in being able to live in the gray, it was Stephen Barton. So without further ado, I would like to invite Stephen up on the stage, and I am hoping that he will accept our award for uncommon courage for meaningful dialogue and action on gun control.
Thank you, Sophia, for that very generous introduction, and thank you to the Center for this very unexpected honor. The program tells me that I'm the last person in between you and food, so I'm going to keep my short. So almost exactly a year ago, I stood in front of thousands of my fellow graduates and their loved ones on the Carrier Dome at Syracuse University to deliver a speech much like I'm doing now. Flanked by distinguished academics and professionals, I stood at the podium and tried to impart what little wisdom I had acquired during my 22 years on Earth without feigning. I implored my peers to remember that, quote, "The only limits we face are the ones we create for ourselves." Less than a month later, I was dipping the rear wheels of my bicycle in the Atlantic Ocean, about to embark on a cross-country trip that would test my own advice. My best friend, Ethan, and I were about to pedal nearly 4,500 miles in less than 80 days with more than 30 pounds of camping supplies and other equipment on our backs and bikes. It's actually easier than it sounds. The journey actually began 3 years earlier when I received an unexpected email from Ethan while I was studying abroad in Madrid. Ethan was hard at work in his second year at Yale after a summer spent studying Mandarin in Taiwan, while I was still adjusting to the language barrier and the copious pictures of sangria. Ethan's email was brief, but it contained a suggestion of almost unlimited potential. What do you think about doing a cross-country bicycle trip after graduation? I quickly wrote back an enthusiastic support of the idea, seizing upon the glorious image of two old friends riding off into the sunset before parting ways to pursue their respective ambitions. Ethan and I wanted desperately to travel our beloved country, especially after being confronted by the realization during our trips abroad that we didn't actually know it that well. We resolved to travel slowly and purposely through middle America's patchwork quilt of towns, farms, and villages. We would trace the territorial growth of our country as settled by our pioneering ancestors so many years ago, but by trading a Conestoga wagon for bicycles and a tent. And so we dipped our rear wheels in the Atlantic Ocean at Virginia Beach on June 6, 2012, and 43 days and 2,750 miles later, we arrived in Aurora, Colorado, where we bought tickets to the midnight premiere of the summer blockbuster we've been talking about all trip long, The Dark Knight Rises. Yes, that movie on that night in that Aurora, at that theater. I was hit in the head and torso by a shotgun blast before I fully realized what was happening. I fell forward into the aisle and listened to the steady report of a semi-automatic rifle as warm blood rushed out of my neck and through my fingers. I remember hearing Ethan, who was not wounded, yelling at a 911 dispatcher through his cell phone. Our host for the night, who sat between us and whose ticket we bought out of gratitude for our hospitality, had been shot in the head. A winding, unpredictable cross-country journey had led us to one of the worst mass shootings in America's history, as if our lives had been leading up to it ever since Ethan's email arrived in my inbox in Spain. I thought I was going to die, but I didn't feel ready at all. I was 22 years old. I just graduated from Syracuse with a few degrees. I had a Fulbright grant to teach English in Russia and offered to join the Teach for America Corps. If nothing else, I had a cross-country trip to finish. The gunman's 100-round rifle magazine suddenly jammed, snapping me out of my fears and allowing me to escape out the back emergency exit. I ran to the parking lot where I found a police officer tending to someone who had been shot in the leg. As the officer drove us in the back of his police car to the triage area, the other shooting victim leaned over and asked me if I was religious. I told him I wasn't really, but he said he would pray for me anyway. Maybe somebody heard those prayers because I was in the operating room less than 30 minutes later. Ethan escaped without physical injury, and our host survived without serious damage to her brain. I woke up 2 doors down from her in the intensive care unit of the hospital a few hours after surgery, filled with more than 20 pieces of lead and a renewed sense of vitality. But my mind didn't linger long in the circumstances of my own survival, and I began to place my brush with death in greater context by reading about the staggering amount of gun violence in our country. What was once a totally peripheral issue to me had suddenly become the focus of my waking hours. I was shocked to find out that approximately 12,000 Americans are murdered with guns every year, and more than 18,000 commit suicide with a firearm. To say nothing of the uncounted sons, daughters, mothers, fathers, friends, neighbors, and wounded survivors left behind. I was appalled when I learned not only that it's possible to buy a gun without a background check, but also that it's so easy to get one without any questions asked at all. Gun violence isn't just an urban issue, as I once believed, nor is it a gang or minority issue. It's an American issue that affects us all. Yet any discussion of the matter was notably absent from the campaign trail last fall. By and large, elected leaders ignored the issue, and the public discourse came nowhere close to my personal views. When I was riding across the country and meeting strangers, I saw people who came from such different walks of life, and I saw everything that united them. But the discourse, the conversation that I was hearing about gun violence was all about everything that divides us. I soon realized I couldn't rightfully get upset over inaction if I wasn't personally involved trying to bring about change. As I was deciding to defer my Fulbright to focus on my physical recovery, I reached out to the staff of New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who co-founded Mayors Against Illegal Guns, the leading national advocacy group for gun violence prevention. What was a random act of senseless violence had suddenly empowered me. Mayors Against Illegal Guns hired me in September to help with research, communications, and outreach to others affected by gun violence. And that has been probably the most important part for me. I've been able to meet hundreds of survivors, hundreds of victims of gun violence, and watch as they've transformed from survivors and victims into advocates and activists. And we've worked together to transform our tragedy into advocacy. Since the moment shotgun pellets first pierced my skin, I realized just how arrogant I was to tell my fellow graduates a year ago that the challenges of living are merely self-imposed. Rather, our lives tend to be filled with obstacles and limits over which we have little or no control at all. A relaxing weekend in the Denver metro area can suddenly turn into an unexpected stay in the ICU with only some scars and damaged nerves to show for it. And I was lucky. It's clear to me now that our lives are ultimately defined by how we react to our setbacks and difficulties. We may not be able to change the past, but we can affect the future. It's no secret that gun violence prevention suffered a major setback last month, when legislation expanding background checks and banning assault weapons and high-capacity magazines failed in the Senate. Right after the vote, I had the honor of meeting Sarah Brady, whose husband was nearly killed during the failed assassination of Ronald Reagan in 1981. The Bradys led the charge for stronger gun laws in the 1980s and the early 1990s, passing the first background check bill, the Brady Bill, that created the national instant criminal background check system that is saving lives today by keeping guns out of the hands of dangerous people. You might expect her to have been disappointed in the wake of the failed vote, But her eyes lit up when she met me, and she said something that will stick with me for a long time. Sometimes, she said, it just takes a good defeat. And she reminded me that it took several defeats and 3 presidential administrations before they were able to pass the first bill that bears her name. We're all going to suffer defeats during the course of our lives, but it's our choice to let them break us or strengthen us. The chorus of voices calling out for reform to our broken gun laws has grown even stronger since legislation failed last month. The White House has recommitted itself to the cause, as have many members of Congress from both sides of the aisle. There are everyday Americans who are calling their congresspeople, who are writing them, who are asking for meetings, attending rallies, more than ever have before on this issue, and I encourage you to join them. There's a growing consensus that this time will be different, that the victims will not have died in vain, that the families and survivors will finally receive closure, that our country will no longer be scarred by senseless violence. And that's the America I hope to find when my friend Ethan and I get back on our bikes this summer to finish our trip. Thanks for your time.